located in this region. And with that, I now call the Finance Committee meeting to order. Let's do the adoption of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda? Motion to adopt. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Adoption of the minutes from May 12th, 2025 meeting. Second. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, there's no delegations, and we'll move on to the invited presentation from TransLink. With us today is Olga, Jason, and Dave. They will be providing a presentation regarding item E4 on the agenda, which is a TransLink application to the Metro Vancouver Regional Fund. Welcome to all of you. You have 10 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Chair. Good afternoon, committee. Thank you so much for having us over. My name is Olga Kuznetsova. I'm Vice President of Financial Services with TransLink, and with me I have Ralph Nielsen, our Director of Corporate Sustainability. And Ralph will open our presentation by updating everyone where we are at on our zero-emission journey.
All right. I think I can move the slides over. As you know, TransLink's had a long-standing leadership position in climate action and improving air quality in the region. Supporting the regional and the province's air quality objectives and environmental goals is the second statement in the act that created TransLink in 1999. We were the first transit agency in North America or in Canada to adopt natural gas buses. We also were leaders in developing and working and executing hybrid diesel buses. We were the first transit agency in Canada to develop and execute renewable natural gas, and using that as an offset to our natural gas bus fleet emissions. And more recently, deploying renewable diesel through our diesel fleet. More than half of our diesel fleet is now being fueled with renewable diesel. In the long term, this is a snapshot of our current roadmap to net zero, part of our zero emissions playbook. We know that we're going to reach and or exceed our targets for 2030. Thanks in part to our continued efforts to electrify our bus fleet, but also with respect to our use of renewable diesel. Over to Olga.
Thank you so much, Ralph. Thank you. So now, as to the actual application at hand, there are two parts to the application that is in front of you today. There is an application for new projects, and there is an amendment to the previously filed applications. In the new projects, we are bringing in front of you the replacement of diesel buses with 102 battery electric buses that will take 990 diesel buses off the roads. This is considered like-for-like replacement. We need a greater number of the electric buses due to different capacity and the requirement for the deadheading and the charging for the buses. We are also presenting an application for 64 battery electric buses in depot charging infrastructure at Port Coquitlam Transit Station. And we are also presenting an application for one pilot trolley bus, which will pilot in-motion charging technology, which is new to us. On the amendment application, we are presenting a small change of scope in the Marple Transit Center, where the configuration was revised, which reduced the number of buses in terms of the capacity of the center. It's not a big change. So mostly our amendment is centered around the cost escalations, and I will talk to that a little bit more. So that's for the Marple Transit Center, conventional bus replacement of 57 battery electric buses and 10 en route charging fast chargers and the infrastructure at the Port Coquitlam Transit Center, the application that was filed earlier. Our application is to maintain our assets in state of good repair and maintain our system in the reliability and advance us on the journey to the zero emission that Ralph just talked about. The objectives of this application are aligned with our 2025 investment plan that was approved by the Mayor's Council, low carbon fleet strategy, Metro Vancouver plans, and regional emission reduction goals. So I have briefly spoken about the new projects, being the conventional bus replacement that will require funding of $193 million. The chargers will require a funding of $21.9 million, and pilot trolley bus is $2.8 million. One may ask, well, aren't you running the trolley buses? Why would you not go ahead with the application and replace the entire fleet? In-motion charging infrastructure is new for us. In-motion charging buses new for us. We really need to test out how the pilot is going to work on our streets before we commit to the replacement of the entire fleet, which will come to you through further application, through the future applications. With that, I will turn over to Ralph to talk about the emission reductions.
Yeah, so the emission reductions for the new applications really focuses on the main part is on that 102 battery electric buses replacing the 90 diesels. That basically represents about a 5% further reduction against our 2010 baseline. That's going to make a significant difference to our overall roadmap to net zero and zero emissions fleet. The in-motion charge trolley buses, though, should they prove to be feasible, have the potential to reduce another 410,000 tons of GHGs in the region. And that's from the ability for those in-motion charge trolleys to get off of the overhead line and take over some of the traditional diesel routes that we have and some of the diversions that we have to accommodate around construction sites and other things that happen on the roadways underneath our trolley network.
Thank you, Ralph. Now, as to the cost escalations. So what we have been seeing is not a trend that is uncommon across the industry. On the vehicles, our battery electric bus replacement have seen 20% vehicle unit price escalation. So that is $16.4 million additional fund requirement. Similarly, on the en route charges and the depot charges, we are seeing the increased vendor price in the electrical components, but also we have encountered some site conditions at the Port Coquitlam that require additional work. As you are all aware, Marple Transit Center site is a very complex site. I toured the site just last week and appreciated sheer expanse of it, but also the very complex geotechnical conditions that required putting in more than 3,300 piles, raising the site for the flood protection, and just overall complexity of the works that are going on there, which resulted in the cost escalation requiring additional funding of $195 million. Here you can see the rendering of what our future Marple Transit Center will look like. Our first 100% electric vehicle from day one transit center, which will significantly contribute to the region's reduction in the greenhouse gas emissions. As a recap, this application is to maintain our fleet and infrastructure in the state of good repair, improve the reliability of our transit system, reduce the greenhouse gas and particulate matter emissions, and contribute to meeting the TransLink's, the Metro Vancouver's, and the region's and the province's goals. With that, I will open the floor for questions.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Director Hurley?
Yeah, just a question on the Marple Transit Center. I was by there yesterday, actually, and saw the numerous piles that are there. Now, when we do our initial engineering of that site, should we not know the conditions of the soil ahead of time? Should that not be part of our budgeting process? Mm-hmm. So I'm surprised to hear that we find out about the number of piles we need after. So.
This is a great question, and this is a question that Mayor Hurley, I have asked myself when I was faced with this cost escalation. So Marple Transit Center is a second-hand site. What it means is that there were structures on this site. It's not a green field construction, it's what you call a brown field. So in order to build our site there, we had to excavate what is underground. Because this is a very old development site, it basically started there when Vancouver was pretty much first born and expanded to the banks of the Fraser River. There are significant challenges that we are encountering, such as a lot of wood that needs to be taken out, hauled away, the contaminated soil that needs to be hauled away. We keep discovering the foundations of the old buildings that need to be taken away. The till level on the side, so basically you have the top, think about the topsoil and more firm till level. It's very uneven, resulting in the piles of varying lengths. So I talked to our geotechs, and they assured me that it was absolutely impossible to know everything that we are encountering right now, because there were no drawings of this site. There weren't even good history of what was on that site at the beginning of the 20th century. So these are the challenges that we are dealing with, unfortunately.
Okay, so I guess then it was pointless even using geotech engineers at the start if they couldn't do the work. So I know they're not cheap. And anyway, it seems to be the way the world is right now. Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Any other questions? I had a few, if I may. What is the definition of the term conventional bus?
Ralph, do you want to take this one?
Okay, conventional bus. We use that term internally to mean basically a 40-foot bus, okay? So within that, we have different propulsion technologies, right? Diesel, battery electric, et cetera. But generally, from a layperson's perspective, it refers to a 40-foot bus, most of which are diesel buses.
Okay.
Yep.
And then what's the cost of a diesel conventional bus?
I think Dave, who's in our party, would be able to answer.
Yeah, $800,000.
Okay.
$800,000.
And what's the decrease in GHG emissions from a new bus versus an older bus, conventional diesel?
Oh, we're dealing with probably around 90 to 95% GHG reductions. Zero tailpipe, of course, with a battery electric bus.
No, not a battery electric, from an older
Yeah.
diesel run bus to a new diesel run bus.
Oh, at the emissions improvements? Minuscule. Like in context, maybe a few extra kilograms of emissions over an older bus versus a brand new bus.
So what is that emissions?
Greenhouse gas emissions, nitrous oxide, particulate matter.
No, how much is it per bus?
A few kilograms extra as the bus gets older towards the end of its life.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so what about the GHG emissions from the buses that are driving, that are not in service to go to different depots throughout the Lower Mainland? So like I see a bunch of buses that are not in service driving to, like from Surrey to Coquitlam or wherever, to go to depots because there's not enough depots in the region.
Yeah.
So what's the extra emissions on that?
I don't actually know. I can find out what the percentage of our overall fleet kilometers is that relates to that deadheading. That's called deadheading between the depot when the bus actually gets in service. Dave might know the general percentage of kilometers. We can get back to you on that.
Okay, no
But it
problem.
would be roughly, whatever that percentage is, would be the equivalent to the GHG percentage that we're dealing with.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Okay, thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to reports from committees or chief administrative officers. So the first report on the agenda is the 2024 Statement of Financial Information. Are there any questions or comments by members? Could I get a motion? Second? Thank you, Mike. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay. We'll move on to the next report, which is the Metro Vancouver's 2025 Financial Performance Report number 1, and I'll pass it on to Harji.
Thank you, through the chair. The financial performance report number 1, so you'll recall at the last committee, we brought the year-end audited statements, and this is the first report for 2025. We are forecasting a surplus against our annual operating budget of about 17.6 million, largely due to some savings. Or not so much a savings, but in our liquid waste utility, there's a couple of projects that are on hold. So that savings will, surplus will be sustained throughout the end of the year. And we also have some forecasted surpluses due to vacancies across the board, about 5%. On the capital, we are forecasting about an 80% annual cash flow target against our 1.8 billion for year end. And I'm available for any questions, and staff are here too, related to the report.
Does anyone have any questions? Okay, I had a couple, if I may. So this is for the current year's cash flow, of the 1.8 billion. You said that approximately 80% is forecasted to be spent. But what about the remaining cash flow from the previous year on the capital projects that were still in progress? I thought that those ones were coming to have their cash flow come this quarter. So wouldn't the cash flow then, shouldn't it be higher spend than what was projected?
So that's a very good question, and through the chair, that's what we'll reflect on, is kind of the year-end surplus as a carry forward of spending. So most of the surplus was related to capital projects that span over multiple years, and the annual budget is created in October for the following year. So we're not completed the end of the previous year. So there is some overlap there. When we deal with this, is at year-end, the surpluses are moving to a reserve per policy, or they're paying off debt, or we did not utilize the debt to the level that was first expected, and we utilize the cash. The application of the new cash flow and the timing of spend, it really comes down to timing. So the variances of the surpluses versus when we're spending them are all being allocated through the reserve and the new year application.
So how much of the reserve was utilized for last year's capital?
So the last year's capital surplus is about $500 million, and so far we have spent about 300 million.
Of the reserve? Okay.
And it's complex, so Chair Cooner, I would have to come back with more allocation. So with the entities, they're all different, and the solid waste utilizes a tipping fee, and most of that's received monthly. The water sales are monthly, but there's a 2-month lag. When it comes to liquid waste levy, we collect that in August annually. When it comes to housing, there's rental revenues. There's also BC Housing contributing. So when the grants are received, there's the application of the DCC reserve. So there's not one simple answer to this question. So it is complex, is one thing. So I do want to confirm that the allocation, we follow policy. And at year end, when there is reserve, it'll head to, if there's surplus, if it's a real surplus savings, again, following the policy, will go to the appropriate reserves and or pay down debt, or also we will utilize for, just make sure I have the right wording.
It's just confusing because this is a cash flow, but then that cash outflow is not being picked up.
Yeah, no, it is first to, like, it'll either allocate to the reserve, pay down the capital that's still moving. It'll either pay off some debt that's maturing. It'll also be utilized for any one-time expenditures that may not have been known, and also rate stabilizing for the long term. So held in the reserve for rate stabilization.
Okay. And then, so there's some deferred operating projects, but I thought the board deferred the projects for 2026 onwards, not for 2025.
So that's the April 9th workshop for all the committee members. The April 9th workshop did focus on looking at strategies to get on track to a 2.5% HHI. And inside of that, some of the deferrals largely should be reflected for 2026, but can start now in terms of if they spanned over multiple years. I would have to get back exactly to the specifics, but there could be some overlap.
Okay. And so and then for the Metro Vancouver housing here, it says that there's no additional impact to the household tax requisitions, but what about the waivers?
So in terms of the DCC waivers for non-affordable housing, there is a bylaw that supports waiving DCCs. And the implication there is going to reside with the taxes. So maybe a bold statement I can soften in terms of our next report, but there is an indirect and direct hit in terms of the waivers.
And then are they, for the sewage area, are they done by area or are they done?
But they would be done by area.
Okay. So, and then I also noticed here that says that for under regional parks, that there's some projects that are taking longer due to permitting requirements. So why is Metro Vancouver having permitting issues?
Through the chair, I'll call for Deputy CAO Ravicina.
Thank you, through the chair. The permits are required generally provincially that are taking time.
Oh, it's the provincial ones that are taking time. Okay. And then for the capital, like expenditures here, I'm wondering if we can get additional columns and then have those, just this part, come back, starting on page 16. For all the capital expenditures by project. Like, we're missing a total budget column. We're missing whether it's been amended or not, and what the spend has been to date, and then the current year's cash flow, and then what's expected, like when it's expected to be completed is missing, and the category of what it is, whether it's a growth project or so on.
Okay, through the
If we
chair,
can add that and
we
bring
can
that
have-
back? Because there's a bunch of projects in here also that aren't kind of, okay, for regional parks here, half the budget is spent basically on other projects that aren't listed. So like, how do we know what those other projects are? Are they like maintenance or?
So in your book on the page 115 or 100-ish of 117 of 416 for other committee members, is there's at the bottom of each of the capital programs, there's other projects that looks really inappropriate, but when it comes down to it, it's through the years, there's over 400 different minor projects just ramping down and completing. And so when you net them, they come to a very small number, but they're at the end of their life for the most part. We have all the detail related to that, but for this reporting, we had summarized it, but it's all available.
Okay, is it under like a certain amount? Like if it's under 50,000, then it goes into other projects, or is it just any project that's at the end of its life?
I would have to defer to staff. Maybe there's... Linda has the answer. Do we have a threshold set, I guess?
No, there's no threshold. It's just if they're at the end of the life in the prior year, some of the costs due to the nature of accounting and the invoice doesn't come in till the following year. You'll see that there's no cash flow, but we have to pay the bill because it's the end of the life, so you'll see actuals.
Is that the reserve stuff that's coming out
Yeah,
then?
that's the stuff that rolls
Okay.
forward that came from last year's sort of excess.
Okay. And then I had a question on the biosolids processing. What's the total value of that project? I'm on page 118. It's under the waste to energy facilities. It's the very first one. It's the 7.5 million where 300K has been spent. I'm just wondering what the total cost of that project is.
So I'll see if, okay, it looks like Cheryl Nelms is here right now. In the 2025, the planned cash flow expenditure is 7.5. The multi-year total value, Cheryl, do we have that?
Actually, I'm just looking at my notes here. I've only got the annual spend. Right now, we're just in the planning phase for that project, still identifying what the requirements are. So Peter's group is working on that. We don't have the actual, so I don't have the value for you. I can get back to you.
So is that 7.5 million all planning costs?
That'd be planning and some early design, like ideas for how we can go about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And, So,
Sorry, just for clarification, are you asking about the biosolids dryer or the biosolids
the
removal?
very first line item here, it says biosolids processing.
That's yours.
Okay, so it's actually a project being done by solid waste. And so there's a capital investment there that will allow us to process some of our biosolids at the waste energy facility.
Okay, so, but nobody knows how much the total cost of that project is gonna
This is Paul. Yeah, 7.5 million this year, I'm not sure.
I can-
Paul can, we need to
can
get
email
back
it.
as to what the full cost of that project is.
be. Okay, and then I just had one final question. I thought we were going to change the way we do consulting and have it more in-house, but then I see we've spent like $12.6 million in the first quarter alone on consulting that I can find. So is that from like previous, or when is this change going to happen in 2025?
Through the chair, we're now on page 128 of your package, 416, the listing of procurements. So yes, I think Deputy CAO Ravi is about to speak to it. I can open it up. Ravi, these are procurements for the first quarter prior to our April 9th workshop.
Yeah, no, through the chair. We did have a discussion at April 9th about transitioning work in-house. Of course, there's a balance because there's specialized design work that our project delivery team needs to do through consultants. That's going to be ongoing, and we're going to continue once our budget is approved in October. We're going to start transitioning and putting forward suggestions as far as transitioning work in-house. But that is going to take us some time to get there.
So that's for 2026 onwards?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, and then we can expect a 40%, think it was, decrease in consulting going forward then in 2026? I think that was the number that was floated around.
Yeah, I can't recall the number that was presented in April 9th.
It'll span over multiple years, so it won't be all in 2026, but there's a trajectory to get on that path.
Up to 40%.
I don't have the exact number.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't remember quoting an exact number.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So could I get someone to move the recommendation? All in favor? Opposed? Carried? Okay, next we have the TransLink 2025 Metro Vancouver Regional Fund application. Are there any questions or comments?
Second.
So, yep, Director Little?
Yeah, I'm always a little bit puzzled by our role in these, both in terms of approving debt requests from municipalities and these kinds of things where we have a seemingly very limited role, but it does seem like we're expected to have the totality of information for the request, how the $470-odd million is going to be spent to some level of detail. We don't actually have a lot of detail here about the $470 million. So I guess my question would be, has this been vetted by and approved by the TransLink Mayor's Council? Is this their project, or in the black box of the $470 million, is that projects that are identified and prioritized by staff or prioritized by various investment plans? Or how did these specific projects get put into the $470 million, if I may?
Perhaps start with that question, then I can deal with the program as a whole.
Sure.
Thank you, Mayor Little, for your question. So all these projects that are in front of you, they have been included in our investment plan. So 2025 investment plan is the most recent approved one that includes the projects that were in flight and approved in previous investment plans. Every investment plan identifies the sources of funding for these projects. So these projects have been earmarked as funded by the CCBF fund. There was no change in funding sources compared to the investment plan. So that all these projects are consistent with the investment plan. Then in terms of accountability for spending this money, on the annual basis, we come back to this committee with the annual report on how this money are being spent. How do we pick the projects for the CCBF funding? My team here, led by Jason, is responsible for maximization of allocation of various funding sources that we have, external funding sources being federal for the most part, where province matches, based on the eligibility criteria, so that to reduce as much as possible the debt service cost to the TransLink that directly impact our revenue requirements.
So just to be clear, though, these are all investment plan approved, and therefore the investment plan had to be approved by Mayor's Council. That's a big part of their work plan. So
100%.
all of the projects that are being considered in here have already been vetted and approved by the Mayor's Council. Is that?
That is correct.
Thank you very much.
Anybody else have a question? Okay, I had a question. So you're asking board members to allocate the funds for the upcoming 3 years to projects that were over budget from the previous cycle, from 2021 and 2022. So I'm not sure if other funding sources were looked at, or why this would be the primary source of funds and what was discussed at the Mayor's Council. And I also know what was put forward was that the electrical buses would be based off of if it was able to be funded. So now the term conventional is put into quotation marks in this now. So I'm not sure if the mayors that sit on the TransLink board understand that when they approved conventional buses, that it was electric buses. And I'm not sure if they are okay with us using funding for this 3-year cycle to pay for overages from the previous cycle that could be funded in some other way or through TransLink's operations, frankly. So I don't think there's enough information here for us to move this forward and have the board members who don't sit on the TransLink board make this decision without having it go to the Mayor's Council. So I would like to put forward alternative number 2, that this goes to the Mayor's Council, and the Mayor's Council can then give a recommendation that they agree with this plan. So I would like to put that motion on the floor.
Second for discussion.
Okay.
Yeah, the mayors that sit on that board, and there's a couple of us here. I think I only see 2 of us here, but, and there's more online. We're very aware of the electric bus purchases, and we're not thinking they were conventional buses. So we've actually been pushing for electric buses for a long, long time. And they haven't been able to find the sourcing for them. So there's no need to send it back to the Mayor's Council. They were very, very aware of what they were voting on.
Director Brody?
Yes, I would add to that. I mean, the Mayor's Council is basically to approve funding, getting the funding for TransLink. And so if you need more information from TransLink, I suggest to go back to the TransLink board. I'm not sure anything will be served by that. I agree with the comments of Chair Hurley, but I don't think sending it back to the Mayor's Council will do anything but delay.
I think the issue here is the people who don't sit on the Mayor's Council don't know what was approved or not. So if we're going to look at So I think one of the comments that were made in the governance report we just had was a lot of board members feel like they don't have the information to make decisions, and this is $500 million that is being requested to be allocated without having that endorsement by the people who sat on that board. So I don't think adding that step of, if the mayors had no issue with it, then I think not letting the rest of the board know that, and the board members who'll be voting on this, shouldn't be an extra step.
Well, this, with respect, this goes to if it's passed, it goes to the Metro Vancouver Board, and you've got virtually all the mayors there, including the mayors that also sit on the TransLink board. So I do, with respect, think you've got it covered each and every way.
How does a board member know, though, that doesn't sit on that?
We could let you know.
I just think this is part of the governance issue that we were just talking about, where things are flowing now to us, but I think they should go to the mayor's council, recommend that they approve this, then come to the board. How do we get the information to the rest of the board members?
I believe that was done in regards to the work plan of the mayor's council. It was approved. And this has been a pretty much a standardized process each year, that then it comes to the board to release the funds, because the funds are vetted through Metro Vancouver.
So why are we then using these funds for previously overage expenses then? Why wasn't other alternative funds or options looked at?
I don't believe there was any other options.
So these projects are
Perhaps,
contingent.
maybe staff could answer that question.
If I may, thank you, Chair, for your question. We did pursue the alternative sources of funding, so there aren't many. We maximized the ISIP funding, so there are no dollars left. We pursued the Zero Emission Transition Fund from the feds. Jason, are we done with that application? Have we heard back? And we did not submit that amount of the escalation, is that correct? Okay, so the amount with the zero emission fund, transition fund with federals, that application is still pending, and it is not included in this overages. So really, it's also not eligible for the future upcoming CPTF fund because this project has already started a long time ago. So this is the only source of funding that is available. If we do not get access to this funding, we will have to go out and borrow this money and incur debt service costs in order to pay for this, which in turn comes to the property taxpayers and the fare payers.
So if you are successful with that grant, then will this amount be repaid to this funding, so then we can use it for additional buses?
No, it's not double counted. That amount that we are waiting for the decision from the feds on, from the zero emission fund, it's not included in this application.
Yep, so if you are successful in that.
It will cover that. If we are not successful, we will have to go and borrow.
So then, if you are successful, what happens to the difference in the funds then? Are you going to come back to us and ask us for more buses?
I'm sorry, I think there is a confusion as to the parts of the application. So as part of this application, we are asking for $200 million extra for MARPOL. There is about $100 million that is sitting with the federal zero emission transition plan fund. Total cost escalation is $300 million. So 200 coming from CPTF, 100 coming from the feds.
So then you are taking it into consideration?
Yes, I think it depends on how you define taking it into consideration. All I'm saying, we are not double dipping. We are not asking for the same amount to be funded through CPTF and through the federal fund.
So then what happens if you don't get that 100 million?
So that's a risk that we are running. We will have two options: to return and ask for money from CPTF, which is not likely because in our plans, the CPTF is already maxed out for our fleet replacement. We would have to go and borrow those money.
Okay, and then that will then cause you to have interest expenses that will...
Exactly.
So then will that cause a reduction in service?
No, we will have to deliver this project.
Okay. So it's up to... The motion on the floor currently is option, the alternative 2. That's right. Okay.
That's the motion that you put on the floor?
Yeah, and it was seconded. And Director Little? Oh, Director Little had something. Okay. Well, I'll just let Director Little comment first.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I think I get the point that the chair is expressing is that there's quite a number of projects that have been approved that could be applied to the black box of the CBTF fund or the combined application. And the question not being answered is, did the mayor's council specifically pick these projects and approve these projects, including the escalations for it? Or is it just that staff have picked from the list of previously approved projects? I think what you're saying is that it's more the latter, that staff have populated the request with previously approved projects under the mayor's council, if I have that correct.
Yes, Mayor Little. So we, a couple years ago, we did perform a review with Mayor's Council of the process to approve, for the process of application for CPTF funding, and exactly this question came up. Does Mayor's Council need to do dual approval as part of the investment plan and then separately approve the CPTF application itself? And at that time, it was decided that Mayor's Council approval of the investment plan is sufficient for the projects to then, in accordance with the investment plan that is approved, to go for the CPTF funding, because the investment plan does identify CPTF as the source of funding for these projects.
I tend to agree with Mayor Brody's assessment of it, that I don't know how much more value is going to be added by referring it back to the main board. But it is also fair to note that I don't think the main board has had a fulsome discussion, the TransLink Mayor's Council has had a fulsome discussion about the escalations on Marpole. That's more recent. And so it would be easier in future that if this came forward as a referral package, that the package was specifically authorized by the Mayor's Council. That would make it a whole lot clearer that they're aware of what's coming forward in the package. Having said that, I tend to agree with Mayor Brody that I don't know how much is going to be added in the process by referring it back to the board, to Mayor's Council for further information. So I'll look to the rest of the board for their comments on the matter, but I don't know how much value is added in the referral rather than approval, but there's no question in my mind. I don't think the Mayor's Council has been briefed on what's specific in this package, and that's concerning.
That is correct statement. So in the current process, the CPTF application itself would not go separately through the Mayor's Council, and the investment plan approval would be considered a proxy. However, going forward, we certainly can change the process and bring future CPTF applications through the Mayor's Council.
Well, I don't want to cause any delays in funding, but it is hard for somebody who doesn't know all this background to try to make a decision that's $500 million. So it would be helpful if we could get that in the future, because it is a lot of money and there's no background or conversation about what was discussed through the Mayor's Council or TransLink board that the mayor sit on. So I think that was the issue, and I don't know what's been talked about, what's not talked about. Like, I know a lot of people here are mayors that do, but I think I'm happy to pull my alternative 2 and move this forward, but I think there is a whole bunch of missing information in this report.
Thank you. I just want to speak more to the process, and maybe when this comes to the board, if we could ask staff to just put in a paragraph in terms of the process of why Metro Vancouver receives the funds and why the board is asked to release the funds to go to TransLink. I think that's part of the missing link in the process. This has been a long-standing process. It does feel a little cumbersome in terms of a middleman, a middle board. If I recall, I asked this question when we were giving feedback on the changes to this funding, and I don't recall, off the top of my head, I can't recall the answer to that question, but given that there's numerous new members on the Metro Vancouver board, I think just outlining why that's flow through would be very helpful.
We can certainly do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, through the chair. And we can also support in working and asking TransLink to bring this to the Mayor's Council first for the next round.
Okay, thank you.
Through the chair, I would add, there's a few reasons why we have this somewhat awkward middleman situation, but I think the primary reason for it is that these are ultimately member jurisdictions funds that have come from the federal government through the Canada Community Building Fund. And there is an agreement in this region to fund, to pool 95% of those funds and deliver it to TransLink for regional transportation projects. So this is our means of accountability to ensure that those funds are being well used from an accounting standpoint, and that the funds are used toward projects that advance regional goals in Climate 2050 and Metro 2050 and so forth. So we could certainly put some information in the board report that explains this relationship.
I appreciate that reminder, because as soon as you started saying that, it was like, oh, yes. And in fact, the Metro Vancouver board approved that 95.5 with the new funding. So that approval's been there. Thank you.
Okay, so someone want to put a motion on the floor? No, I withdrew that.
I'll move the,
Can I withdraw that? No, okay, can't withdraw it, apparently.
yeah.
Okay.
So call the question.
Oh, sorry. So all in favor? Opposed? Okay, so it's failed. Could I get another motion on the floor?
I'll move the main motion,
The recommendation?
recommended
Okay.
motion.
All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay. So we'll move on to the 2025 Regional Cultural Projects Grant Report. So this work comes to the Finance Committee from the previously dissolved Regional Culture Committee. And so we have Lucy Dussault and Sarah Fosher, who will be providing the committee with a presentation.
Good afternoon. To the chair, Lucy Dussault and I provide staff support to Metro Vancouver, to Metro Vancouver's Regional Cultural Grant Program. The focus of this presentation is to walk through the process and the criteria for the 2025 cultural grant cycle. MVRD board authorization is required to distribute funds from the Grant Reserve Fund as external contributions. Metro Vancouver's annual cultural project grants funded by the Grants Reserve Fund support arts and culture project delivery throughout the region. Project grants are awarded to a maximum of $10,000 per project. A total of $300,000 has been budgeted for Metro Vancouver's 2025 project grants. Due to high demand from a growing number of applicants, many grant amounts typically range between $2,500 and $5,000. This is the timeline for our review process. Staff support the committee by confirming eligibility of all submissions and by using the grant criteria to generate a recommended distribution. Your recommendation, discussed at the July meeting, will go to the MVRD board for final approval. Following decision by the board, we announce the award recipients. Staff moved swiftly in August to get the funding to the recipients, as some will start their project delivery as soon as September. The 2025 application period closed April 28th. Staff screen all submissions for eligibility and then review using these criteria. Staff generate the suggested allocation of 2025 grants for review by this committee and the board. Next, let's look more closely at the eligibility and the scoring criteria. Applications are disqualified if they're late or missing their financial statements or letters of support. Applications must be a nonprofit society or co-op for at least 2 fiscal years, and further, the society's focus must be arts and culture. Given our distribution of checks will be in August, program delivery before September wouldn't be eligible. This also ensures marketing materials recognize Metro Vancouver as a funder. This grant program is not for general operational funds. It is only project funding. Now we'll walk through evaluation. Metro Vancouver should not be the sole or majority funder. Applicants should demonstrate that there's demand and collaboration for their project through letters of support and identifying financial support. Staff also consider previous grant recipients' history with reporting. We set report deadlines and track interim updates and final reports. And issues with receiving timely project reports would impact their consideration for future grants. We also look for applicants to demonstrate they're a well-run arts and culture organization, one that is stable and resilient. Staff have a lengthy list of criteria and scoring considerations, and all applications are reviewed to these considerations, and the in-depth review is tracked in a spreadsheet to compare applications via multiple lenses on project traits. Here you can see a list of the considerations on the slide. Last year's intake received 162 applications totaling over $1.3 million. This was narrowed down to 57 organizations, with many receiving less funding than was requested. Some applications were technically eligible, but less competitive than others and received no funding. As part of our continuous improvement, staff made 2025 adjustments to improve assessment efficiency, tightened the grant criteria with the intention to reduce disappointment and lost time and resources spent on applications and submissions unlikely to receive funding. Adjustments for 2025 included being clear on the budget thresholds we would consider for project proposals. We're looking for less than 30% of the budget from Metro Vancouver's grant. 30% of a budget from any one funder would leave the applicant options to move forward with a revised program if other funding sources don't all come to fruition. Applicants need to identify at least 2 other sources, and this connects to the 30% funding threshold from the Metro Vancouver grant and supports resilience if, for example, one funder falls through. Next, we're looking at how applicants demonstrate stability and resilience. We set criteria so that Metro Vancouver is providing grants to nonprofits providing paid jobs to staff and ones that are operating with annual budgets over $75,000. Again, these criteria speak to resilience and stability and are not dissimilar from other granting organizations. Previously optional, letters of support are now a requirement. The letters should also preferably come from a project collaborator or a funding source, and this helps strengthen our confidence that the proposal is being delivered by an organization with capacity and resilience. In addition to the revised criteria, staff refined the application form to streamline the review and comparison process. For example, there's more clarity when requesting specific details. We added tick boxes and prompts for details we could fairly evaluate and compare between the proposals. When reviewing the submissions, we organize them by genres. These are used to cluster similar applications, and this would also be how we group the applications when the recommended grant distribution comes about. That wraps up the process for the 2025 cycle. Here's a look at some of the tools that we use to reach out to the arts and culture community to announce the launch of the grant intake. They're described in your report. These are just a few examples of some of the promotions that we did for the program. Staff are also available throughout the intake, and we are available to help applicants discuss proposals and their ideas directly or answer further questions about the grant program. That concludes the overview of the Metro Vancouver Regional Cultural Project Grant Program, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Any questions or comments? Okay, I'll get someone to move the recommendation. Oh, sorry, Director Brody.
Just a quick question. I see in your materials that you've talked about staff helping the applicants, because it sounds like everything is very well-organized and justified, but it would be daunting for many groups. Do you get a lot of groups taking you up on that offer to help them with the application?
Through the chair, we hold a info session online. We held that back in April. So we held a webinar for all the interested applicants with the intent of gathering the same questions and answering them all in one go. And yes, I do have quite a lot of phone calls that I respond to and email queries in the spring during the open intake.
All right, thank you.
Okay, the motion's on the floor, so all in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, so move on to the Greater Vancouver Water District DCC Reserve Fund bylaw, number 265 to 2025. Over to Harji.
Through the chair, thank you. In terms of the process and where we are in the process, DCC for water was created last year, and we are just doing the administrative step to create the reserve.
All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, we'll move on to the Metro Vancouver Regional District DCC Reserve Fund bylaw, number 1419, 2025. Same thing, I'm guessing. So could I get someone to move the recommended? Second? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, we'll move on to the next report, which is the best practice review and proposed updates for the development cost charges categories. So we have Laurel, who will be providing the committee with a presentation.
Quite a lot to absorb in this report, so happy to provide some highlights and hopefully have some time for questions and discussion. This is something we really want the committee's feedback on, as it's kicking off the start of basically the update to the DCC bylaw for 2027. This is the first part of work that will feed into this. So just as a reminder, what we're looking at here, this is really just looking at the policy of what categories are included. So we're not quite looking at the financial implications or rates just yet, but this will feed into that work later this year and into next year. So it's a really important piece of work to kick us off. So as an overview, we did a best practice review of the different approaches there are to DCCs and categories. Most of this guidance is set by the province, but there's still quite a few options that you can take. And so we'll review what we looked at. Some of them make more sense at the municipal level, but might not work as well for the regional level. So not to say that any of these are better or worse necessarily, just what will work best for Metro Vancouver going forward. And you can see the attached consultant report provides that full range of options that were looked into. And then the staff report is really just highlighting initial recommendations. This will all feed into external engagement with stakeholders and with member jurisdiction staff over the summer. And then we're hoping to bring final recommendations in the fall, and that will again feed into that broader scope of work. So to get started, we created some criteria to assess those options to really understand if they're going to work for us or not. So how easy are they to implement and administer for Metro Vancouver, but also for our member jurisdictions who administer on our behalf. The link to infrastructure demand is a really important one, showing that growth and how it's linked to the demand for regional infrastructure is really the key driver of DCCs. So we'll talk about that more as we go through, but that's a really important criteria to keep in mind. And then we also looked at, does it align with our shared regional goals? So looking, is there alignment that encourages the type of growth that we want? Or on the flip side, are there things that are contradicting those goals? And then lastly, of course, aligning with member jurisdiction DCC bylaws as well as TransLink. There's some variation across the region, so it's not possible to perfectly align everyone, but our goal is to align as much as possible just to make it easier for staff and for developers. So we looked at 5 key topics. So we have recommendations for some of these, but others we looked at across that criteria and they just didn't match up, so we're not recommending exploring further. So I'll just run through each of these really briefly. First up, we have the approach for how residential DCCs are allocated. So there's really 2 ways you can do this under the provincial guidelines. You can either charge per unit or by floor area. And we're recommending staying with the per unit approach, which is our current approach and used by most members across the region. So there's good alignment there. It's the simplest approach and it has a really clear link to infrastructure demand. And again, that's based on average household size. So you're really looking at the average household size per unit, linking that directly to how many people, what's the impact on regional infrastructure. So that's really a good connection with the data. Floor area, on the other hand, it's got some pros and cons, trade-offs. It's not as clearly linked. You can have a larger home, doesn't necessarily have more people in it. So it's loosely linked, but it's not as clearly proven with the data for us. And there's also some potential unintended consequences. For example, discouraging larger family-oriented units like 2 and 3 bedrooms, which we know are a really critical need in the region. So for that reason, we're recommending sticking with the per unit approach. It's something we could explore probably in the future if there's interest there, but at this point, we're recommending sticking with that approach that most members use. Next up, we have small-scale housing. So this is where most of the significant recommendations are coming, and this is really in response to the recent provincial housing legislation that's really opening up, enabling multiplexes on many more units. So it's really important to look at our current DCC categories and definitions and make sure that we're responding well to that. So we're going to see a lot more of that across the region. So our current system has 3 basic definitions or types of housing and 3 rate categories. So it's very simple, but it's missing a lot of those nuances of multiplex development. So things like duplex, triplex, multiplex, they're not well captured, as well as secondary suites and laneway homes in anything that's not a single detached development. And overall, the rates don't always reflect the average household size. So we're really looking to update the program to make sure that it's really equitable in terms of average people per household, the size of the unit, the number of units per lot, to make sure that's really reflecting the impact on regional infrastructure. So the recommendations here are to add a lot more definitions to really account for that full range of development scenarios that are out there. There's a lot of evolving trends in terms of different forms of multiplex, laneway homes with more than 1 unit, block-off suites and townhomes. So just really making sure we're going to capture all the possible options out there with our definitions, and then having rate categories that match up to each of those. We're also looking at decreasing the average household size for multiplex units and suites and laneway units. So again, just looking at what is the actual size of those homes on the ground and making sure that makes sense in terms of what we're charging and the impact on regional infrastructure. And then the last item is we're looking to separate the laneway homes as a separate charge from single detached homes. So right now they're lumped all in one, whereas if you had a duplex on that lot and a laneway house, it would have a separate charge. So again, just trying to be as equitable as possible about what's being developed on the lot, what's the average household size, and what's the impact on regional infrastructure. So I'll just walk through this table to kind of demonstrate some of these recommendations. So what we're looking at here, the RLDU, apologies for all the acronyms, but that's the residential lot dwelling unit, so we can just call that a lot charge. That's the highest charge and the highest average household size, basically for your single detached home. The most number of people, highest charge. The next one would be townhouse, so generally less people per household, a lower charge. And then lastly, the apartment charge is your smallest charge, smallest number of people per unit. So if we look at our current system, the single detached lot charge allows a single detached home with a secondary suite and a laneway home, so 3 units on that lot, and it falls under a single lot charge. Whereas if you developed a triplex, so again, 3 units, just in a different form, it would be subject to 3 lot charges. So we're trying to separate out the laneway to make it more equitable across the board, and you can see the proportional rate impact to rates. So for most categories, this will actually result in a decrease because we're kind of right-sizing that average household size. For things like multiplex and laneway homes, they're generally smaller in size, so we're suggesting an apartment rate category would be more suitable. Whereas if you have something like a duplex, it's generally smaller than a single detached, but it's not as small as a multiplex, so it falls in that townhouse rate category. So we're just trying to right-size the number of units per lot average household size, and impact on regional infrastructure, regardless of what form the design of housing. And it's just based on how many units are on that lot, what size are they, how many people are there. We can come back to this. It's a little complex, but it's also, I think, really important to note that DCCs are really for new additional density. So if someone has a single detached lot and they're adding a secondary suite, there's no charge for that because it's already included. If there's a greenfield development, they would be subject to a full charge. But if they're increasing the density on their existing lot, so if you say going from a triplex to a sixplex, under the new system, we would say a sixplex subject to 6 apartment charges, but they would get a credit for the existing 3 apartment charges on the lot, so they would only have to pay 3 apartment charges because they're adding 3 units. And the credit, importantly, is at the current rate, so it doesn't matter what was paid when they created that existing density, they get the credit at the current rate, so they're only paying current rates for additional density. Moving on, the next key topic we're looking at is non-residential. So the current system, we just have one generic non-residential category. If you look across the region, most members, it's common practice to break that into subcategories for at least industrial, commercial, institutional, sometimes further, but those are the big ones. And it's because the infrastructure demands are quite different for different land uses. And you might have a very large industrial building that doesn't necessarily have the same impacts on, say, water as an office building of that same size. So we're suggesting breaking out into these common categories, as well as having one for agricultural development. As we found recent engagement with the sector, there's really a need to treat this sector differently. They are very unique in terms of their water needs and even where they can draw water from. They can draw from non-potable sources, whereas other land uses can't. So it's really important to look at the unique needs of that sector and have its own category. Also recently, related to agricultural development, in May, the board passed a new waiver and reduction bylaw for agricultural developments that have a low environmental impact. So cases where, say, a greenhouse has a system to capture and reuse rainwater, they're only having a very small impact on regional water, they would pay a reduced rate. And we're proposing, this was supposed to be an interim solution, but we're proposing we could consider keeping that for projects that do have a really low impact on water, and then have a standard category for kind of general projects that if they're drawing on regional water supply, they'll have this rate, but if they're using very little, they would have a reduced rate. And then expanding further on that topic, we could also explore if there's interest in looking into a waiver or reduction for low environmental impact for other uses, such as institutional uses, if they have systems to really reduce their impact. That could be reflected through a reduction bylaw. So these are just things that are on the table that we are hoping to get engagement and feedback on. And then lastly, we have a couple categories that we're not recommending exploring further. And this really comes down to that one criteria where we couldn't clearly link to infrastructure demand. So rental residential was one we looked at. Could we have a different category in the DCCs with a different rate to support purpose-built rental? When it comes down to it, a rental home with 3 people, the infrastructure demands are not different than an owner home with 3 people. So we couldn't quite make that clear connection that's really defendable. And ultimately, it looks like the DCC tool is just not the right tool to kind of support that type of housing as much as we might like it to be. And the second one was we explored, could there be an area-specific charge for Metro Vancouver growth areas related to the regional growth strategy? So basically areas in close proximity to transit. We know there's some connections between infrastructure efficiency and high-density areas, which tend to be transit areas. This is mostly true if you look at the local scale, although there's some complexities there. But we looked at it, and if you're looking at regional infrastructure, it's so broad that we can't actually make that case that it would be more efficient for infrastructure in proximity to transit. So we're recommending not moving ahead with this. It's quite different than having kind of your different sewerage areas. This is looking more at growth areas related to Metro 2050. And there's also obviously potential inequities among different municipalities in the region. Some have more access to those transit areas than others. So based on these categories, just didn't meet our criteria for something that we want to explore further. But I think it was a worthy exercise to look at, is the DCC tool something we can use to promote our shared regional goals? And these are both important goals, but it looks like the DCC tool is really not the place to do that. But we'll continue to work with our members to explore kind of other ways to support purpose-built rental and growth in your transit. And just looking at next steps, so we'd like to get feedback from the committee and board on this. We'll be circulating to other committees and subcommittees, advisory committees, and then doing targeted engagement over the summer. So really looking to connect with staff at each of your member jurisdictions, especially the ones who are involved in the day-to-day of implementing DCCs, and really test drive all the definitions, make sure we've got everything covered, see how it will align, and then also engaging with industry as well, so developers of all scale and those who develop in different sectors. And then the idea is that we'll bring back final recommendations in fall, and if those are approved, then that will feed into the broader DCC bylaw update. So along with updated population projections and the new capital program, we'll have new categories, and that will all filter together to determine the new rates for 2028 and beyond. And there'll be a lot more analysis and engagement with that broader project throughout the end of this year and into 2026. So I'll stop there. I'm happy to answer any questions and get any feedback from the committee as well.
Any questions or comments by members? I had a couple of questions. You said for the per floor area square footage that for residential houses, it may discourage family size, but every person I know that's building, they're maximizing their square footage. Like and if they can only get 4 units in their house, they're gonna maximize their square footage to get those 4 units in there, right? So how would that discourage family sized?
I guess if you have, thank you through the chair, it's a good question. If you have a charge that's per square footage, the larger a building, the higher your charge. So in essence, it's encouraging people to build more compact, which is great, but it might discourage, if there's higher fees to build a 2 or 3 bedroom, that might discourage that overall.
But if it's based on square footage, I don't know a single person who builds a house that doesn't maximize their square footage, right? So like when they build a house, they're gonna use the maximum floor area and they're gonna build up and maximize their square footage as much as possible. I've never seen anybody build down. Like when you're spending that much money, I've never seen it happen. So I was just curious where that came from. So that might be something to consider.
Thank you.
And then what about townhomes that have units, lockout units?
Yeah, thank you through the chair. It's a really good question, and yeah, something we definitely need to look at in the definitions of how that would land. I think at a high level, in terms of the rate categories that would apply, again, that's going to be quite a small suite. So it would likely be, if you've got 2 units in one townhouse, that would likely be 2 apartment charges.
Okay.
The lowest charge we can, just acknowledging those are both going to be smaller units.
So if you have like a 2,000 square foot townhome, they're getting charged an apartment rate?
So through the chair, the current system is a per unit charge, so regardless of square footage.
Yeah.
So it is an average of all different sizes. So, 1 bedrooms through 3 bedrooms, they're all charged the same per unit cost. And then that per unit cost is based on the type of housing, which is linked to average household size. So there's a rate for, single detached or something of that size, townhouse, duplex, something of that size, and then smaller apartment, something of that size. So it just links based on the type of housing and the average number of people per household.
So we would get charged a townhome rate, which would be, and then an apartment unit rate.
Sorry, for a lockout in a townhouse?
Yeah.
So if it was developed at the same time, it would be 2 apartment unit charges. If it was a townhouse that existed already, and then you're adding a lockout suite, you would get the credit for what is existing. So the ultimate charge would be 2 apartment charges, but you would get a credit for a townhouse unit charge, which is higher. So you're just paying the difference for the additional density.
But the townhome rate and the apartment rate are separate categories.
Yeah, so the credit system is based on kind of what's there and what you're adding. So it does get a bit complex when you're adding density to one category and kind of making it a different category.
So say I'm building a new townhome and there's a lockout unit in it. I'm going to get charged a townhome rate and an apartment rate, is what you're saying? Or 2 apartment rates?
2 apartment rates, correct.
But how an apartment rate, that doesn't make any sense to me, because you've got an apartment that could be 500 square feet, and you can have a townhome that's 2,000 square feet, and you've got more people living in a townhome than you do in an apartment.
Through you, Chair, maybe I can just jump in and say this is exactly the kind of complex discussion we anticipate occurring through the engagement process, and maybe we can take this offline with you and try to explain, and if the committee's interested, we can provide some examples in the coming meetings to explain the difference between the townhome and apartment relationship.
Okay, and then I had just one more question. So all of these applications are now coming in, right? The 4 units and the houses and all that. So who's going to pay for everybody who's not currently paying into this because we don't have a category? So what's the cost of that going to be to Metro, and who's going to pay that difference?
Thanks so much, through the chair. I might start, and Harj, you might want to jump in here too. So our objective really is to update the DCCs as quickly as possible to make sure that we're doing continuous improvement on this. And we're recognizing that there's a lot of different moving pieces, updated projections, updated definitions, updated capital plan. And so we'll be course correcting every 2 to 3 years and being able to accommodate for the rates what we've collected, the rates previously, the new rates, and we'll be adjusting every 3 years.
So for 3 years, though, people are going to be making these units and not paying in to the DCCs, right? Until this gets sorted out. So my question is, who's going to end up paying for that 3-year loss in collections?
Yeah, thank you. A good question. It's not that we're not collecting right now. It's just those rate categories might not best match the actual average household size of those units on the ground. So they're still paying DCC fees under various rate categories. So that's still being collected, with the exception of laneway homes on single detached. Right now, that's not being collected. If people are developing those, there's no DCCs collected. But for all the other categories, if you're developing multiplex, that's still being captured before we get to 2028. We're just hoping to right-size things so that they make the most sense for what we're seeing on the ground.
Well, I can tell you in Surrey, we got a lot of those applications coming in and nothing's getting collected. So I'm just wondering if it's going to go back on the taxpayer at the end of the day.
Right now, the size of the pie is the size of the pie, and the categories that we have, we're collecting DCCs based on those rates and housing types. And we know that over time, we can do more to nuance the housing types so that we are right-sizing the rate structure. It's really the answer we can give right now.
Okay. So it's going to get levied?
Yeah, through the chairs. So we follow, the best practices guide is it doesn't fall back on the development. We first calculate our DCCs. We'll do another refresh of the DCCs for the 2027, factor in any changes. Development, as we all know from the economic analysis, the market's always changing, things are always changing, it's fairly variable. We will monitor that, but any financial gaps, first we're funding through debt. We're looking to debt finance, utilizing the DCC and the existing ratepayers, holding them at a 5% or below average rate per year based on the board's direction. And we'll monitor it, and if anything is proving to be a major financial gap, the DCC revenues are not coming, the uptick isn't there, that'll be something we have to keep looking at, and we'll be bringing that back.
Okay, thank you. Could I get sorry, Director Little?
Yeah, I was just going to say thank you very much for the presentation. I think it is going generally in the right direction. I do think that we need to talk about a subcategory of apartment at some point in the future. Just for an example, for our community, the District North Van, the cheapest apartment for sale right now is $299,000, and the most expensive apartment is $20 million. And so to have them pay the same fee seems a bit absurd. And so I do think there has to be something in future that contemplates that, or else this becomes another regressive tax.
Director Hurley?
Yeah, I just wanted to confirm the discussion that seemed to be going on there. I kind of missed it because you said DCCs were being collected. You said nothing was being collected in Surrey.
Not on the laneways, right? Because that category
Not on
has,
laneways.
so all those developments are now putting in housing and taking advantage of the sewer and the water, but nobody's paying in.
Right, so, but the fourplexes are being collected, the four.
Yeah, but there's a lot of laneways coming in.
Is that
I would just say that the single detached rate is being set to accommodate for that right now. So the rate structure was created knowing that laneways were going to be developed, maybe not to the extent that they are right now, and the single detached rate was set to accommodate for that. Now we're trying to right-size that framework.
Okay, was there any other questions? Okay, could I get someone to move the recommendation? Okay, second, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried? Okay, we'll move on to the manager's report. Over to you, Harji.
Through the chair, something to celebrate, even if sometimes we don't get the shout out in the media, but the GFO award on the our Financial Reporting Excellence Award. This is a good award. This actually not only confirms that we follow generally accepted accounting principles, it also looks at our audited financial statements, receiving the clean report from an independent auditor, and it also has additional statistics that demonstrates continuous improvement in financial reporting. So that's the annual report. Fourth time receiving it, and I encourage reading it. It has 3 major sections. I think we could utilize some of that even through the learnings of the complexity of our organization and how we have so many committees and how we come to the board, and it can get fairly confusing fairly quickly. So I know we've had these discussions at their senior leadership team with Jerry as well, with the how can we make it all come together and simplify it. This report has a lot of good information, and we'll look to utilize some of that.
Any questions or comments? Director McEwen?
Just wanted to say congratulations, great work, and I'll move the recommendation.
Oh, you stole my thunder. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, there is no information items, no other business. Can I get a motion to close the meeting? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, motion to adjourn this meeting. Second. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.